Trip to America, Part 2. Okay, last day in San Diego, drove the Acura to the airport and dropped it off, said goodbye. What the hell is an Acura, you may ask if you're not an American. I didn't know about it either. It's Honda, built in America, so maybe it's one of these things where the foreign car company relocates and hides behind any sort of tariff wall in the country they wish to sell in, the big American market. It will be interesting to see whether China, which looks to be eating everybody's lunch with EVs, goes and produces in another country. No idea what the candidates might be. Who knows? Asia? England? Watch this space. Maybe not America, unless some sort of deal's done. Does the Inflation Reduction Act beckon for Chinese companies? Probably not. It's not the role of the Chinese Communist Party to give jobs to Americans, Chinese people. So should be interesting trade wars coming up, etc. Okay, arrived at the airport and jumped on American Airlines off to Phoenix. Yes, Phoenix, the Sunbelt, reborn in Arizona. As the plane swooped in, I had pretty arid and pretty boring, to be quite honest, but hey, this is where a lot of America's being reborn, is in these Sunbelt states. West Texas, New Mexico, where I was heading to, Arizona. So, got out of the plane and had to run a bit as the connection flight was leaving pretty soon. Hopped on the plane to Albuquerque, much smaller, although full, and away we went. Arrived in Albuquerque, got down to the airport, picked up my bags, all pretty smooth, walked out, and then thought, how the hell am I going to get into town? I kept waiting for a taxi. I didn't really want to use Ubers. I'm always trying to resist storing my credit card, rightly or wrongly. I sort of hung around expecting a taxi to turn up, which is pretty stupid actually. And then eventually I heard the buses were free. A bus arrived, and I didn't know where it was going, but I assumed it was going into town. I jumped on the bus. It started driving. I suddenly realised this could go nowhere near where I wanted to be. So I had to fire up my phone and watch where the location or where the bus was going. Eventually, I jumped off probably some 4 or 5k where I needed to be. A motel I'd booked being the Econo Lodges. I found the Econo Lodges quite good when I stayed in them, and they were relatively full. I then felt pretty good, and this is unusual. I decided I'd walk the 4k, even though the town itself was a bit uninteresting. Sort of medium-level skyscrapers, a couple of interesting streets with houses, but not really grabbing me that much. So off I trundled. The weather was warm, I guess, for October, but not hot, and there's a bit of a breeze blowing. I eventually got to the motel, settled in. It gave me a pretty good room, and then decided I better go out and have a look at Albuquerque. The motel, the Econo Lodge, was just around the corner from Albuquerque Old Town. The Old Town is interesting as Santa Fe's Old Town, although some would disagree with that. More on Santa Fe's Old Town later. Up around the Old Town, it was only a 10-minute walk, going through a fairly rundown shopping centre, well, typical of a lot of American shopping centres. Not a lot there. I did notice ice cream place and marijuana store. So marijuana is obviously legal in New Mexico. So the Old Town was established in 1706, and this is typical of those towns in New Mexico, including Santa Fe, established a lot earlier, by the way. We'll get to that. And it's basically Spanish people in Mexico and decide to come north, see what's on offer. So Albuquerque gets established. It's all adobe. The church is apparently 1793, I mean. And it's quite interesting, and it fronts under the square. Quite a couple of good restaurants that I tried, although they were crowded. Well, you had to wait a while, but all in all, not bad. A bit more on the Spanish motivation for heading north into continental US. Surprise, surprise, gold. I guess having been successful in routing the Aztecs, they thought there would be more mythical gold cities to the north. These rumours got blown up big time, and then eventually an explorer, Coronado, Vasquez de Coronado, travels north from 1540 to 1542, looking for a mythical city, 7 of them apparently of gold. Interesting how rumours get carried away, but is this the font of all motivation? Gold in those days? He camps in the Albuquerque Valley, if I can call it that, and perhaps notes some things. Goes as far as Kansas, but all the Pueblo Indians he encounters are quite poor, and we're not going to see a rerun of the wonderful civilizations of the Aztecs. Even though there was no gold, perhaps it could be rancher country, and eventually somebody will go up there for the free land, and New Mexico gets established by the Spanish, despite what the Pueblo Indians might say. Well, next morning, I decide I'll head up to Santa Fe. This is a jewel in the crown of New Mexico. I'm eventually heading to a place called Bent, halfway between Albuquerque and El Paso being the town on the Mexican border, and staying with a friend in Bent. But he's not ready for me yet, so no brainer to head up to Santa Fe. Santa Fe is only an hour's drive north from Albuquerque, and finally 2 cities where people don't fly, probably not economic. And the train exists. Yes, it's economic. The train takes 2 hours. They call it the Rail Runner. It's got the Road Runner on it of cartoon fame. Also a chance to see the countryside. So I jump on the free bus. Takes me down to the station. Takes me a while to work out where the station platform is, but eventually find that. I'm like real early, probably an hour and a half. Sit down and start reading the business news in Australia. God knows what. Sunny day, sapping up the sun. Eventually, somebody comes by, probably the only person I really met on the trip, because I was travelling fast and travelling alone. And she's from Florida, looking to make a sea change, and is heading up to Santa Fe, where her brother lives. Interesting story, been in Florida 20 years, semi-retired. The dog's died. She's a Democrat, fed up with the Republicans, doesn't like DeSantis, he's the governor of Florida. I don't think he was too worried about the floods, but looking to make a sea change. And believe it or not, as we travel up to Santa Fe, the story becomes, well, there's employment here. America's starting to gear up again because of the Ukraine war. And New Mexico is the site of Los Alamos out of Santa Fe. So America on the move. Talk along the way, and looking at the scenery, it's fairly deserty, fairly dry, and we stop at 3 or 4 pueblos. Now, these would be the equivalent of our outback indigenous settlements. They don't look that great. They've got a store, houses, and a few high-rise. People seem to have cars, but that's about it. It doesn't look like it's greatest place to be, but that's how it is. So as we come into Santa Fe, it gets all very exciting because the bells start ringing. American trains are always ringing their bells. Wow, guess what? We are in New Mexico, the home of aliens. Boswell, further east of Santa Fe, is where the little E.T. guy crash landed. If you can believe it, he was imprisoned, and apparently he likes ice cream. I once heard that. Anyway, I'm talking to the American girl about it, and she says, yeah, if you want to check that out. Simon Pegg did a movie some years ago called Paul. Paul's the guy, or the alien. And just to welcome us, as it pulls into Santa Fe Central, we've got the flying saucer spaceship embedded halfway in the ground. This would crash there. And I thought, wow, this is good. This is a vivid imagination. Anyway, the journey's over. American girl and I'll meet a couple of days later, have dinner with a brother, and get more of the story. And I've got an Airbnb, the best one I've ever stayed in, and it's only about a 10-minute walk from the station down a nearby street. And I get to see Santa Fe's nice little adobe houses. Now, this is a city that you could possibly live in, I think. especially if you like the southwestern architecture. This is a mix of Indian and Spanish Mexican architecture, quite colourful. And I score an Airbnb which is done up like this. And it's what's called a casita. It's a small one-bedroom house separated from the main house and truly excellent. Lounge room, kitchen, bedroom. And the lovely host has done it up as a southwestern style. And she's got a few books. I checked them out, and a lot of people would come from the East Coast back in the days, the 30s, the 40s, the 50s, when you'd get respiratory diseases or TB and you'd head for the dry air. That dry air considered good for your health. More on this when we go to White Sands National Park near Bend. Okay, so let's have a look around Santa Fe. I head up to the town square, and this is bigger, this is more adobeized, and this is older than Albuquerque. So Santa Fe ranks as the second oldest capital in the US and the oldest city, I should say, in the US, and the oldest west of the Mississippi. Once again, Spanish, I should say, coming up from Mexico. It's originally a site of a Pueblo village, so not surprising that the first of the Spanish, call them conquistadors, arrive in 1598. Of course, I guess now due to Coronado's exhibition of some 60 years ago, 1540 to 1542, they're not expecting gold, but hey, what can we get out of these places? Let's get established. That governor's considered fairly cruel. In fact, the capital isn't Santa Fe, it's established a bit further north, and he's eventually removed, and then another one comes, establishes Santa Fe proper in 1610. We then have a Pueblo revolt, which the Spanish are driven out, but come back 10 years later and some sort of understandings arrived at, although, as most things, which happens with conquering, the Indians probably lost out. So Santa Fe, yep, we've got the church, we've got the square, we've got the restaurants, we've got the sites, we've got it all. The Palace of Governors, very interesting to look around that. Oldest house in, I think, America. It's got the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum, Mio Wolf, I'll tell you a bit more about that later, and lots of pueblos. The Palace of Governors is quite interesting because what I love about America, they tell it like it is. And I get in there and I look around the place, and there's been various governors over the hundreds of years, and I'm reading something and they say, well, typical, a governor would always blame the last governor why there hadn't been much progress, and then complain they needed more money to sort the place out. Nothing's changed, has it? But anyway, let's move on. Okay, so I have a great night in the casita, and next morning I better get up to the Georgia O'Keeffe Museum. This is where Americans love this woman. Picture of her on a motorbike with a boyfriend, and she's doing all this great art. I decided I'll use my economic prowess as the confused economist to make sure I get a good deal to look at the museum. So about 11 o'clock, American service standards are in full swing. They're out there with the iPad saying, okay. I said, yeah, I'd like to look through. Can I go now? No, it's all booked out till 2:30. You better book now because it'll be full. And I think, I'm tired of that sort of talk that everything's going to be full. Don't try and fool me because I'm smarter. I'll be back at 2 to have a look. Don't book. Bit like never give your credit card to Uber, but hey, maybe I've got a problem. So I roll back at 2 and they say, sorry, it's full. And I go, gee, I guess I underestimated the consumer demand for Georgia O'Keeffe. They love her. Okay, so what's left? But I'm saved. I can't believe it. I'm in Santa Fe and there's going to be a full eclipse. I'm getting a bit worried about this because I didn't want to blind myself. Gee, where am I going to buy glasses from? The viewing glasses. Don't worry, this is America. Go to the local library and they're handing them out. And the guy's got about 100 there and he hands me one and I say, God bless America. Why not? So we have to wait 1 or 2 hours as the eclipse forms up. Now I know why there's plenty of people in town. It does get darker, just like they say, and everybody gets pretty excited. Somebody tipped me off that when there's an eclipse, you get annular rings of light. So I get a couple of photos of this, and if you have a look at the thumbnail for this pod, you'll see that photo showing the annular rings. Onwards, back to the casita, admire the southwestern architecture and the lovely architectural books. Off up to dinner with the American guys. They go to a brew house quite near to the station, actually. I think that's the best deal in town. We get talk. The brothers, they've been in Santa Fe a long time. They've got a family house, and she thinks she should be able to stay there. He does special purpose coatings for floors, probably knows his stuff. And then she's really looking for a job, like I said before, at Los Alamos, as it's all starting up again. And Los Alamos would be not that far. I didn't go there, not that far from Santa Fe. So all of a sudden, I hadn't seen Oppenheimer, but I thought, oh, yeah, I'm in the Oppenheimer land. Yeah, more on Oppenheimer later. Okay, so next morning, I'm off to Alamogordo, the nearest town to David's place there in Bent. And David's not ready for me. He's gone to a film festival in LA. I'm thinking, gee, I wouldn't mind your lifestyle. Anyway, there's plenty for me to do in Alamogordo. I'll spend a night there. He advises me to go to the White Sands National Park, History of Space Museum. Okay, so I do the drive. I don't go back via Albuquerque. I take a sort of back road, thinking that I'm going to do a few Ks on Route 66. The old Route 66 highways got a new interstate next to it. So I come off the highway, and it's not much really. Even if you do Route 66 in Albuquerque, not so great, just typical American street. But anyway, so I get on the back roads. It's quite a long trip down there. I get the biggest surprise maybe of the trip. A roadrunner crosses the road. These guys don't fly, I'm told, unless they have to. Go screaming across the road, and it's a very angular-looking bird, just like in the cartoons. I then come across the crossroads of New Mexico. This blows my mind. Town's called Vaughn. There's about 2 interstates, or maybe 3 intersecting, I should say, and there's also the railway. And Vaughn has 1 new motel, and in front of it is a cigar-shaped space-looking object, which is the drive-in, food, a diner, Philly steak, whatever you want. And the rest of Vaughn, totally run down. I've seen the most derelict motels, no longer in use. Another motel, there looks to be one Mexican woman staying in it. The railway station, tiles are all destroyed. There's plenty of freight trains. They're double loaded with containers, and don't know where they're going, but it's America. So here we are. I can't believe it. This is the crossroads of New Mexico. And I suddenly figure out, hang on, Americans don't waste time demolishing stuff. You just leave it as it is. Nature will take its course. So I take a few photographs of all these disused motels and starting to think, gee, have I really got the right thinking on this trip, looking at this stuff? But anyway, so off we go, back in the car, and finally make Alamogordo, book into a motel there, and the next morning I'll be doing the Space Museum and White Sands. Okay, up and at 'em the next morning, but the first thing I got to do is a power supply for the mobile phone. Hadn't got one, need an American one. So I stopped by the T-Mobile shop in downtown Alamogordo, nothing doing, and not opening till 10 o'clock. So not much to do. Find a local newspaper. There's always stuff in the local newspaper that you won't see elsewhere. Guess what? Apparently the Trinity bomb, which was the test bomb site that was used, big deal in Oppenheimer, you know how the weather decides whether they're going to set it off or not. Well, there are people complaining, have been since 1946, that there was radioactive fallout, and they've never been compensated. And apparently good old Joe Biden 2 years ago finally gave them some compensation. So the power of local news, huh? You won't see that in the Oppenheimer movie. So next up is Mexican bakery. I'm looking for fresh pies, empanadas, cakes, whatever. I find one, I walk in, and it's staffed by young Mexican family. And they are busily feeding aging white retired workers, a bit like myself, the $8 special burrito breakfast. I grab an empanada, which is so-so, and This reminds me of Krugman's article in the New York Times maybe a couple of years ago where he said immigration was the secret source of American success. This is low wages, even though the border's sort of monitored, compared to China and Japan where there hasn't been any immigration and the birth rate's declining. Although we're getting that story for most of the Western world these days. So I thought Krugman's article was quite timely, but as I like to say, how else can George W. Bush, the retired president, get his gardens done without the secret source of America's immigration success? It's not old generative AI. AI will tell you how to make a great garden, but won't actually do it. So I finally make the Space Museum. It's out of town up on the hill. Great views of the mountains. They're quite striated. The Space Museum's pretty good. It's got everything you'd expect, but two things stand out, and this is what impresses me about America. They have simulations. Two of them attract my attention. One is you get to design your own Redstone rocket and see if you can fly it. The Redstone was the first rocket that took the Mercury astronauts up into suborbit. And the second thing is the lunar lander. You get to try and land the lunar lander. You got a joystick, etc. See if you can do it. The Redstone rocket, I have 3 goes and I crash it 3 times. I move on to the lunar lander. They spend about 20 minutes trying to train me because I do want to do a good job to see if I'm as good as the astronaut. Well, subsequently, I crash it 3 times. And I got to hand it to the Americans. Great training, but once you fail, they have a bit of comedy. They say, don't call us, we'll call you. My excuse is I'm running out of time. I've got to get to White Sands and be up at David's place in Bent by late afternoon. White Sands, about 20k outside of Alamogordo, not to be missed. Why is it unique? It's not sand as in silica, it's gypsum. Yes, as in gyprock. Unbelievably white, unbelievably reflective of the sun. You'd have to ask the question, it's lucky it's still there. It's had a dual purpose. The Americans also used the area as a rocket base, maybe not so much now. But a guy called Tom Charles moved into the area. His wife had tuberculosis. This is, the dry heat, good for that. And he became influential with his newspaper and convinced, probably with other people on the bandwagon as well, to say, why dig this up for plaster of Paris for a one-time gain when we can get recurring interest in it as a national park? And indeed, it got gazetted in the 30s. And is a unique place and not to be missed if you're down that way. So heading up the Bend on the road out of Albuquerque, travelling north, there are pistachio farms. Quite unique. The pistachio ice cream was excellent, and the trees themselves are quite small, quite cute, well worth stopping by. Turning right off the highway, heading up the Bend. It's a gentle incline because going into the foothills of New Mexico, which in itself is great relief from the dry desert valleys. And as you look in the rear vision mirror, you see the glittering white sands. Unlike snow, which sits on top of the mountains, this ribbon of white is along the base of the mountains. And this is incredibly unique. So finally you arrive in Bend at David's place, and look forward to a couple of days of rest, but not much recreation. But I have been doing a lot of driving. To amuse myself, I have a look at his library, and he's got Pinkerty's book, Capital in the 21st Century, which I've been meaning to read but haven't. The book is basically saying that the returns on capital have improved at the expenses of the returns on wages and income, which many people would probably agree with. He breaks down the returns by the European countries and America, and guess who wins? England. England is the country where the returns on capital are the greatest at the expenses of wages, income. I guess they have royalty as their consolation prize. In fact, this has gone further. Recently, Robert Solow, the growth model economist guy, said that his models fail to take into account land and the rents earned from land. It's sort of disappeared since Ricardo's time in the turn of the 19th and 20th centuries in favour of the more analytical. Marshallian economics is determined by equilibrium and rate of change through calculus. So does the rise of house prices in the West satisfy the idea that the land is located in areas of high income wage income. A lot say supply, that's true, but the price differential might be explained by higher income areas compared to lower income areas. Now, you might say that, yeah, okay, but house prices are going up everywhere, even though there's a differential. So we're back to the pandemic and money printing. A lot of commentators are saying, hey, it's all pretty bad, but they seem to forget if the government hadn't showered us in fiat money, would we have got out of the pandemic as well as we did? Don't know. For sure, nobody was showering people with Bitcoin. Couldn't be done with a fixed supply of Bitcoin. Okay, so now it's time to leave David after a couple of days. Enjoyed the visit. Leaving David's, he advises me to check out Ruidoso, which is a 20-minute drive up the road. This is an Apache reservation, which turns out to be a very cute little busy town. Because it's a reservation, they're allowed to have a gambling casino, which gives income to the town. The town itself has got restaurants, cafes. I didn't see many Indian people, but I think they're probably down at the local reservation office administering for grants from Washington. For example, they get discounted petrol, so it's worth filling up there. But all in all, very pretty in the foothills, pine forests, a great relief from the Death Valleys of New Mexico. So I'm back up to Santa Fe because I missed Meow Wolf. What is Meow Wolf? It's an artist cooperative and originally bankrolled by George R.R. Martin. He's the Game of Thrones guy. And he's basically bought a second-hand bowling alley in the southern suburbs of Santa Fe and told local artists, go for your life. So it's been quite popular. The original one is there in Santa Fe, and it's extended its installations to Denver and Las Vegas. Worth a look. After that, I head up to Santa Fe again, and I get on the hop-on, hop-off bus because there's areas out of town that I didn't see. This mainly is a bunch of art galleries up on the foothills overlooking Santa Fe, and higher up there's the wagon train terminus. Back in the old days, Santa Fe was a transit spot for people heading west, so there's some memorials up there, and where the wagon trains would unhitch and then reconsolidate. I can't get into the original Airbnb that night as it's full, not surprisingly, but just for the record, the host is Esther, and she headlines it on the Airbnb app as a charming one-bedroom adobe casita downtown. It was only a 8-minute walk from the rail runner. So, yep, definitely gets my recommendation. So I end up in another Airbnb out of town because the Meow Wolf is out of town, about 20-minute drive, but I'm another 20 minutes out in the suburbs. And this is an Airbnb, the ones I don't really like, where you're in a single bedroom. You've got to go out into the public area or the private area if you want to sit in the lounge. But it's only one night, and it turns out the lady host there, she's just finishing off a casita. Bit more modern, but not as charming as the one Esther runs, but still, I'm sure she'll make a few bob from it. And a night there, and now it's back to Albuquerque for the final days in New Mexico. Now, if you enjoyed Oppenheimer, a must-see visit is to Albuquerque's Museum of Nuclear Science and History. Definitely go if you want to know more than what the movie tells you. It pretty much shows the history of nuclear through the 20th century. You get the conspiracy theory of Niels Bohr and Heisenberg. Heisenberg's supposed to be the pro-Nazi guy, but the jury's out on him because maybe he slowed up development. And somehow Niels Bohr is supposed to get information from him, and then eventually Niels Bohr is flown out to America to help out. I think that's in the movie. I think the best part I liked about the movie was that when he holds the girlfriend's hand, he says, could see through it, or maybe I can't. Is it matter, or is it energy and waves? Nobody knows the duality of matter, the God particle. The museum shows all the people that were involved with nuclear. including the Manhattan Project. I think the Trinity bomb's in there and the Hiroshima bomb. Trinity was the one I mentioned in Alamogordo when I read the local paper. I didn't go to the site. It wasn't that far from Alamogordo. What I really liked was the original reactor. It's just a pile of wooden sleepers, and got some sort of bottom in it, maybe earth, and they just drop in a mobile of small 1-inch uranium cubes, I think. And then you got to get the reactor going. So I'm not sure if heavy water, I think they need heavy water to keep the chain reaction going. And very comprehensive. Don't miss it if you go to Albuquerque. So I pair the Nuclear Museum with the Balloon Museum. Again, worth a look, especially if you're interested in the history of balloon flight. It gets its genesis from the yearly Albuquerque Balloon Festival, which is the biggest in the world. And I missed it by a week, but there were still a couple of balloons in the sky. So if you go, probably worth pairing with the actual festival, because I don't think you'll ever see so many balloons in one place. And I should mention the Indian Pueblo Cultural Museum in Albuquerque. It would be remiss of me not to. And for all you out there, I haven't mentioned Breaking Bad, but I did look at the series when I got back, but I didn't do any tours. But you can tour, and you can do it on the cheap by going to YouTube and seeing those who tour the hotspots of Breaking Bad, food, and where it's shot. And that finally wraps up Albuquerque. I should have mentioned that they've shot a lot of westerns in the surroundings, so some people go on a western tour. And I didn't mention in Bent that Billy the Kid was killed nearby, and I read the history of the poor guy. He was dudded by the state, by the governor. And a couple of years ago, the governor of New Mexico tried to pardon him, but it didn't happen. I now wind my way back to San Diego and then San Francisco. A night in San Diego, I check out the Tom Cruise Top Gun pickup bar, but don't go in. My style's more over at the Cheesecake Factory, where you'll find a very eclectic American menu. I take the Pacific Surf liner next morning up to LA because it's a coastal run along the railway. Nice scenic trip. And in LA, I don't hang around. I transit straight away to a flight to San Francisco. One night in San Francisco, and then it's goodbye and back to Oz. Okay, that's it for part 2. I'll probably be doing Europe next. In June, July, and August, I made a big European trip with my partner. We started out sailing in Greece through a mob called All Sail. They're based in Pittwater. Quite a good trip, worthwhile. I thought it was a good way to see the Greek islands. I'd never been. Then we went to Cinque Terre, Nice, up through the Route Napoleon to Alsace, Lorraine. That's northern France and bordering into Germany. Then Holland, then across to England and Scotland. Okay, I'll try and get that together in the next few weeks.
Lift up your hands, ye heroes, and swear with proud disdain. The wretch that would ensnare you shall spread his net in vain. Should Europe empty, all her force will meet them in array, and fight and shout and fight for free America. We led fair freedom hither, and lo, the desert smiled. A paradise of pleasure was opened in the wild. Your harvest bold Americans no power shall snatch away. Preserve, preserve, preserve your rights in a free America. Torn from a world of tyrants beneath this western sky, we formed a new dominion, a land of liberty. The world shall own we're free men here, and such will ever be. Huzzah, 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 for free America. Some future day shall crown us the masters of the main. Our fleet shall speak in thunder to England, France, and Spain. Nations o'er the ocean spread shall tremble and obey the prince who rules by freedom's laws in North America.